Click. The sharp axe carrying terrifying magic struck out with one blow, instantly splitting the deformed monster in front of him in half. I told you, Frank, fighting unknown beings from other dimensions is my professional field, and in my field, you have a lot to learn. Doctor Strange was holding his axe on the ground, panting heavily. The long-term high-intensity battle had brought his body, which was no different from ordinary people, to its limit. You still have the energy to talk nonsense. It seems you can hold on for a while. On the other side, Punisher Frank was leaning behind a car as a cover. He had just used up his magazine again, and quickly took out the magazine from the combat bag and replaced it. He found that he was almost out of ammunition. To be honest, for the Punisher, the cooperation with Doctor Strange is not as effective as he expected. Doctor Strange's magic is not as powerful as before. There is no doubt that, but what else does he have for Doctor Strange? Hopefully, he at least hasn't forgotten how to swing his axe. I only have one magazine left, Doctor. If you can't think of another way, the two of us will probably be trapped in this damn place forever. The Punisher doesn't know where they are, but according to the well-informed Doctor Strange, they are currently existing in the mezzanine between the real dimension and the mirror dimension. Strictly speaking, this place cannot even be called a dimension. Obviously, there is some kind of more powerful existence that has set a trap for the Supreme Sanctuary. Once Doctor Strange breaks free from the solidification of thinking and cognitive pollution, the trap will be triggered and pull the entire Supreme Sanctuary into the back of the real world. Erase all traces of these two people's existence in reality. Fortunately, although Doctor Strange's magic is not as good as before, he still has a backup. He has set up soul projections in many places, including Karmatage. Even if he himself is erased from reality, the magical power of the projections will still be preserved. He has appeared in reality. The power of these projections is not strong, but it can still be done to ensure that people in reality will not forget him, and this is their only hope, that reinforcements will come to save them. In this weird world that is exactly the same as reality, Doctor Strange and the Punisher were attacked by deformed monsters as soon as they left the gate. It was a kind of monster that was very similar to a human, but could never be called a human. The first thing they saw was a creature that looked like an elephant, but what was terrifying was that the elephant was made up of the upper bodies of countless humans. It would imitate an elephant-like sound, as if it was deliberately disguised as a real elephant. But anyone who can see this deformed creature knows that this toy has no resemblance to an elephant at all. In addition, they also saw a frog man, composed of a child's upper body and an adult's lower body. It was hard to imagine what a young child would look like with a pair of thick adult legs. But now, they saw with their own eyes arrive. However, it is not accurate to say that it is a frog man, because the child's eyes are blood red, as if they are bleeding. On its head, there are two arms, which are long and drooped behind the head, like rabbit ears. Same. Originally, the Punisher felt that his heart was tough enough. Even if he saw these things, he could still endure his inner discomfort and fight with all his strength. But when he saw a white lion with a huge human head and countless arms as a domain, the Punisher still felt that his SAN value had reached a critical point. Sorry for dragging you here, this place was actually designed by that thing to target me. Doctor Strange sighed and responded. And it's true that your gun is of no use here, Frank. With that said, Doctor Strange took out a wand from his belt, threw it directly to the Punisher, and then opened his mouth to explain. Someone said that you have to fight magic with magic, and this thing will help. Taking the wand, the Punisher emptied his last magazine and saw the humanoid monster in the distance that seemed normal but had 7 or 8 eyes. He knew that he could only trust Doctor Strange at this moment. As one of the most powerful wizards on Earth, Doctor Strange uses all the artifacts that have left a famous mark in history, even if it is a wand that looks no different from a tree branch. Don't worry, this is not a wand chooses the wizard kind of wand. You just need to aim at the target and imagine the attack you want to unleash. You can also shout it loudly, and it will understand what you want. Doctor Strange explained it to the Punisher seriously, then he took out a pocket watch and continued. Buy some time for me, it'll be over soon. Okay, hurry up. The Punisher held the wand and took a deep breath. Then, the Punisher suddenly rushed out from behind the car bunker. Not far away, one deformed monster after another slowly approached. They shook their weird bodies and let out bursts of unexplained roars. Come on, let me see it. The Punisher swallowed hard and glanced at Doctor Strange behind him, who had already begun to recite a spell. The Punisher strengthened his heart. He jumped up and stood on the roof of the car. At the same time, he also attracted the attention of almost all the distorted monsters nearby. The Punisher calmed down and looked at the deformed body closest to him, which was trying to disguise itself as goat horns with its 2 calves. He slowly raised the wand in his hand. Fire is blazing. Nothing happened. 5 seconds passed. The Punisher and the aberrant creature glared at each other. I knew it. The corner of the Punisher's mouth twitched. Immediately, he took action and inserted the wand directly into the aberration's eye. Although the wand is made of wood, its material is very good. There is no resistance at all. The tip of the wand directly penetrates the brain of the aberration. That wand is very rare, Doctor Strange couldn't help but said as he watched the Punisher destroy the wand. If you have time to talk nonsense, why don't you hurry up and cast your spell? The Punisher completely used the wand as a military thorn. After he solved the Goat Man, he immediately jumped over another monster next to him. Emperor Wei Shan is here. Doctor Strange groaned, then he also rushed out of the bunker, pointed the pocket watch in his hand at the fighting Punisher and shouted loudly. Frank, look at me. The Punisher turned around upon hearing this. The next moment, the pocket watch burst out with a huge light. The light flashed away, and Doctor Strange and the Punisher, who were surrounded by countless deformed monsters, also disappeared. In the sewer, with the sound of water splashing, Doctor Strange and the Punisher appeared out of thin air and fell directly into the dirty water. I hope you can tell me in advance before the next transmission. The Punisher suppressed his physical discomfort and turned angrily to Doctor Strange behind him. Speak down, Frank, we are now under the street where we just fought. If you speak louder, you will be targeted by those deformed monsters. Doctor Strange struggled to climb out of the sewage, and then collapsed against the wall. He was exhausted. What did you say? When Frank heard this, he seemed to have heard a big joke. Those monsters are on top of us. You just teleported us 30 feet. The amulet of Amtra can only teleport so far. Doctor Strange threw the broken pocket watch casually into the sewage. He sighed. Although he was a little impatient, he still opened his mouth to explain. The space here is very strange, and teleporting magic is not as easy as you think. Don't say that I am not as good as before. Even if I act rashly, I will fall into crisis. We don't have Deadpool's self-healing ability, if half of the body is teleported out, we will die. I knew magic was unreliable. After a moment of silence, the Punisher could only say this. After a pause, he asked again. What are the origins of those monsters? I don't know. Doctor Strange answered quickly this time. Don't know. What don't you know? The Punisher was stunned for a moment. I just don't know. I have never seen that kind of creature. It's like a nightmare created by a lunatic in a madhouse. I have no idea how those deformed and twisted things came into being. Doctor Strange shook his head, calmed down his tired body and mind, and spoke slowly. They are as if they have been set up, with predetermined settings, actions, thoughts, etc., whether they attack us or break through the gate of the Supreme Sanctuary, they all follow different rules. Act, as it were. It's as if they were specially prepared for us. The Punisher understood what Doctor Strange meant. The two looked at each other and fell into silence. For Doctor Strange, he is going through a very difficult time at this time. Originally, Doctor Strange had not yet become a wizard. When he was still a doctor, he was a very conceited guy, and all his confidence came from his flexible hands and exquisite surgical skills. But then a car accident left his hands disabled. The same thing was broken, and his heart was also broken. Overnight, the world's top surgeon became a useless man. This feeling of disparity cannot be described in 1 or 2 sentences. The strong sense of frustration made Doctor Strange's life worse than death, until he went to Karmatage, learned the legendary magic. After becoming the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange's arrogance returned. His almost demonic magical talent and learning ability made him the most outstanding existence among all wizards. Even the Ancient One was full of praise for him. Later, faced with a huge crisis that threatened the entire world and even the universe, Doctor Strange remained unhurried, relying on his unparalleled magic and mind to solve events that would be extremely horrifying to ordinary people again and again. However, the blow came again. Just like the car accident, Doctor Strange was no longer the walking magic he had been. He had lost most of his magical energy and the power he had re-established. Confidence. Perhaps it was also for this reason that he was tainted by that thing without knowing it. But at this time, Doctor Strange was indeed not as confident as before. He was not sure whether you can survive the crisis here. To the Punisher on the side, he only felt that this short month seemed like a year. I remember you said before that there is a wizard who came here from other universes. He awakened and helped you. So where is he now? Doctor Strange spoke. I don't know, I don't believe him. The Punisher said angrily. If we want to solve this crisis, that wizard is crucial. Only he can help us tide over the difficulty, and only he can possibly save us from here. Doctor Strange said. But we've been trapped here for a month. The Punisher raised his head and looked directly at Doctor Strange and said. No reinforcements, no signals, nothing. Sighing, the Punisher lowered his head again. I once told them that if I didn't take the initiative to look for them, then just consider me dead. Originally, I thought I would die in your hands, but I didn't expect it. Having said this, the Punisher took out the wand again and stood up. His eyes were full of fighting spirit, and he didn't look at all depressed at all. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whose hands you die. It's not my style to hide here. Calm down, Frank, you are going to die. Doctor Strange frowned. So what? As long as we can kill a few deformed monsters before dying, that's enough. Killing one won't cost you anything, killing two will make you gain blood. Even if you die in battle, it's better than hiding here. After saying this, the Punisher turned and walked towards the sewer passage. He wanted to climb out of the ladder and return to the battlefield. Wait a minute, Doctor Strange called. No need to persuade me, Doctor. The Punisher said without looking back. Wait a minute, I'm not trying to persuade you. Doctor Strange shouted loudly, and at the same time he stood up against the wall. Hearing this, the Punisher frowned and stopped moving forward. He turned his head in confusion, as if he didn't understand why Doctor Strange wanted to stop him. As far as he knew, Doctor Strange prided himself on being elegant, and he would never do it. Those who actively choose to die in battle. Aware of the Punisher's confused gaze, Doctor Strange held one hand against the wall and put the other hand next to his ear. What's wrong? The Punisher was stunned for a moment. Doctor Strange showed a smile at this moment. He raised his head, looked directly at the Punisher and said. Listen to the sound of fighting, our reinforcements are coming. Upon hearing this, the Punisher's eyes immediately widened. He couldn't believe it and held his breath. He raised his five senses to the maximum as possible and listened carefully to the sounds around him. Soon, the sounds of fierce battles and explosions came from above, followed by the shaking of the ground. A lot of dust was shaken off the walls and fell into the sewage. But these things around him no longer attracted the attention of the Punisher, because he vaguely heard a very familiar voice. After recalling it in his mind for less than a second, the Punisher blurted out immediately. It's Moon Knight. On the streets of New York, countless aberrant monsters wander here like an army. Their weird and ferocious appearance can make anyone who sees them lose their sanity. Perhaps as Doctor Strange said, these aberrations were created by some kind of existence. They adhere to the most basic settings and rules. Anyone who touches the taboos of the rules will be attacked indiscriminately. However, they were designed to target Doctor Strange, and when the target disappeared, these monsters obviously entered a state of control. They continued to blindly attack the surrounding buildings, trying to find the hidden Doctor Strange. Originally, their offensive had a certain structure. They would attack one after another. The purpose was not to kill Doctor Strange as quickly as possible. On the contrary, their purpose was more like stalling for time. They wanted Doctor Strange to be trapped here so that he could not survive. Time to try and get out of here. But when the target disappears, these out-of-control monsters become more dangerous, or in other words, they become more frantic. To be honest, I almost vomited. Speeding through the streets of New York, Pietro braked suddenly. As he spoke, he raised the scepter of Zeus in his hand and summoned a huge lightning to blast an aberrant body into pieces. Next to him, Moon Knight's expression was not good. Even though he was wearing a hood, you could see the ferocious expression under his mask. Suppressing the physical and mental discomfort, Moon Knight did not take up Pietro's words, but asked. Have you found them? The card shows that they should be nearby. In Moon Knight's hand, a big king is flashing with a strange red light. I haven't found it. Isn't Doctor Strange a wizard? They may have become invisible or used some powerful magic to hide. After all, these monsters are too difficult to deal with. Pietro punched the arm of the aberration that sneaked up on him. But the opponent still has 7 arms. At this moment, a rainbow-colored laser struck, helping Pietro kill the aberration, and at the same time, it also briefly cleared away some of the weaker aberration monsters around it. The person coming was none other than Carolina, and behind her was Blood Baron John. To be honest, even if I have Alzheimer's disease in the future, I will never forget these things. I think they will be engraved in my mind forever, ugh. John almost vomited all the way. As a vampire, John is considered a member of the dark creatures. Similarly, he is accustomed to sucking human blood. But at this moment, when he saw these monsters spliced together by countless twisted human organs, he felt intense nausea in an instant. This is just like humans would never eat a native chicken with 8 wings. This is 10,000 times more disgusting than strawberries in mapo tofu or chocolate sauce in braised pork ribs. Compared with what I experienced before, this place is actually not bad. Don't observe them too much, just keep killing them. Carolina said coldly. Perhaps because all her comrades were dead, Carolina was no longer the cute noob in the children's league. After experiencing the destruction of her teammates and the torture of the spiritual world, she had become a killer. God, exuding an evil aura that makes people repellent. Don't forget our mission, our goal is to find Doctor Strange and the Punisher. Moon Knight said loudly. But we don't know where they are, do we? Besides, we don't know why we are looking for them. Carolina said. I don't know what John has planned, but I believe in him. If anyone can help us solve this crisis, it's him. Since he asked us to come here, he must have a reason. John said from the side. I also believe him, but it is undeniable that he concealed a lot of things, and he didn't even intend to reveal his plan to us. Carolina was a little helpless. That's because you are trapped in pollution. Pietro said. He quickly passed through the aberrations. Everyone saw a flash of silver light, and then only countless stumps and broken arms were left on the road. That thing has polluted you, so it will naturally cast its gaze on you. Quicksilver is right, I mean, Pietro, I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else. Moonlight Knight opened his mouth. You remind me of the days when I fought side by side with the Avengers. Huh, it's okay. We are the same person anyway, but we just took the wrong path in different worlds. Just call me, Moon Knight. Pietro patted Moon Knight on the shoulder with his vibranium arm. Moonlight Knight nodded heavily. Perhaps among everyone present, only he could experience this different feeling, but he quickly adjusted. As the captain, he could not be distracted during the battle. Quicksilver is right. We have all been contaminated to one degree or another, especially Carolina and I. We have been affected by Deadpool many times and almost fell into it. Fortunately, Zhang-Yi helped us overcome it. We got through it and now, we're not sure if it's still affecting us. Moonlight Knight's words answered some of their doubts, but they were mainly meant for Carolina, because Pietro and John believed Zhang-Yi almost 100%, and they did not need to explain. Then how are we going to find Doctor Strange and the Punisher? It's not that easy to find them if they hide. Carolina asked. We don't have to look for them. Pietro held up the scepter of Zeus. Yes. Moon Knight saw Pietro's movements and immediately understood what he wanted to do, so he continued. We just have to let them come to us. When Zeus's scepter was fully stimulated, the internal capacitor core instantly burst out with huge energy, and tiny lightning bolts burst out like small snakes, floating on Pietro's vibranium arm. That is to say, Pietro's suit has an insulating effect. Otherwise, in his current state, the first person to be shocked by the lightning emitted by Zeus's scepter would be himself. John, help me, I want a big one. Pietro stood on the top of a bus and shouted. The magic energy here is not enough, please wait for me. John raised his hands and chanted an obscure spell loudly. This is not just the black magic he learned, but the blood magic that belongs to the origin of the Blood Clan. After reality deviated from its original course and the multiple dimensions collapsed, John could no longer draw any energy from other magical dimensions except the magic of the vampires. But for now, blood magic is enough. Thick magical energy burst out, and with the continuous bursts of lightning from Zeus's scepter, anyone could feel the terrifying energy gathering above. It's going to blow up Quicksilver, do it quickly. It can only be said that technology still has shortcomings. After all, the scepter of Zeus is not the legendary artifact held by Zeus himself. It is just a product forged by humans using their own technological crystallization. With the blessing of magic, its capacitor core has obviously reached a critical point. Feeling the destructive and terrifying power in his hands, Pietro experienced for the first time what it felt like to have power. I believe Doctor Strange and the Punisher will be satisfied with this flare. Pietro murmured softly, and the next moment, he waved his hand suddenly and threw the scepter of Zeus with the terrifying thunder in his hand like a javelin. Die to me. His own super speed combined with the huge power of the vibranium arm made it impossible for everyone present to see clearly the path of Zeus's scepter. The laser-like scepter flashed in midair, as if Pietro had really thrown it. Like a bolt of lightning. The next second. Boom. Click. 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 Astonishing energy burst out instantly, like a detonation bomb mixed with thunder. The terrifying energy instantly tore apart all the deformed monsters around it. Lightning bolts burst out wantonly, hitting all the surrounding conductors indiscriminately, destroying those deformed monsters. The monster's body was torn to pieces. The dazzling light became the only color in this space. Moonlight Knight even guessed that this light would penetrate the reality barrier and affect the outside world. Soon, there were no more standing aberrations around Pietro and others, and everyone could only smell the scent of meat that made them feel sick. Now, Doctor Strange and the others should be able to notice us. Moonlight Knight quietly looked at the battlefield that was bombarded into ruins, and couldn't help but say. I fucking noticed it a long time ago, you almost blinded me, you know. At this moment, a roar came, and Moonlight Knight turned around in surprise, only to see a manhole cover lifted next to where he was standing just now, and the Punisher was staring at him with an angry face. Seeing this, Moonlight Knight didn't know what to say for a moment. Before that, he had a lot to say to the Punisher, but now, when he really saw the Punisher, he found that he couldn't say anything. I can't speak. That's fine, since he is not the kind of person who is good at communication anyway. Although the Punisher's face is full of anger, anyone can see that he is not angry at all. The Punisher is a man who is cold on the outside and hot on the inside. This is something even ordinary people living in New York know. You are finally here. The Punisher looked around and finally set his sights on John. You look familiar to me. Cough cough cough, John almost choked to death. They are all people living in the same city. In the early years, when John was still the Blood Baron, he had contact with many superheroes. Strictly speaking, they were all a bit frivolous. Don't worry about this, we need to get out of here quickly. Where is Doctor Strange? Moon Knight interrupted the Punisher's observation of John and asked. I'm here. Doctor Strange struggled to climb out of the sewer. The long and high-intensity battle had pushed his body to its limit. Upon seeing this, Carolina immediately stepped forward to help him up. At the same time, she also carefully observed this Doctor Strange. It seemed that this guy was not as powerful as the Doctor Strange she met in the fantasy. Thank you guys, if it weren't for you, Frank and I would be in danger. Doctor Strange gasped. He didn't have many magic items left on him. A month of fighting and hiding cost him most of them. Magical weapon. If you want to thank, just wait until you get out and thank Witch Crow. If it weren't for him, I'm afraid you have been erased from my knowledge. Moonlight Knight looked at the Punisher and Doctor Strange and sighed. How could that happen? The Punisher was startled. He had never expected that things had gotten so bad. So what's it like out there now? How's Deadpool doing? How many heroes are still alive? Moon Knight understands the Punisher's anxiety, because the reason why Frank became the Punisher is because he values family particularly. In his eyes, anyone who attempts to destroy the family will be the target of his hunting. And since he had been locked up in the cracks of reality for so long, he was naturally very curious about the situation in the outside world. Moon Knight did not show off, he paused and spoke. Don't worry, the situation is better than we expected, Deadpool has already. Do not say. Suddenly, Doctor Strange shouted, interrupting Moon Knight's words. Looking at the doubtful looks from the people around him, Doctor Strange said quietly. Don't say anything about the outside world, and don't say anything about Deadpool. There is an spy for that thing among us. Hearing this, everyone around him, including the Punisher, stopped. Doctor Strange's words were not alarmist. Long before everyone came here, they had worried about whether there would be some kind of existence looking at them, which would very likely lead to the failure of their entire plan. Everyone looked at each other, as if they were discerning and wary of that person's identity. They didn't know who the enemy was, or when they got mixed up among them, but Doctor Strange's words aroused the uneasiness deep in each of them. Slowly, everyone began to move in a small area. Pietro and John stood together, Doctor Strange was on his own, and the remaining three people, Moon Knight, Punisher, and Carolina, stood together. Needless to say, Pietro and John are Zhang Yi's subordinates. They have been under a strange kind of protection from the beginning to now. Even Carla, they are basically immune to the erosion of that power. And pollution. As one of the greatest wizards, Doctor Strange has been tricked before, but his mental protection ability at this moment is enough to sustain him for a while. The only ones left to consider are Moon Knight, Punisher, and Carolina. If there are really so-called eyes among the people present, then only they can do it. What is your mission? Doctor Strange asked. Hearing this, still immersed in a suspicion of the informant just mentioned by Doctor Strange, Moonlight Knight, who was in a temporary dull state, immediately came back to his senses. He forcibly adjusted the noise and restlessness in his heart, trying to regain his sanity. After a pause, he raised his head. We are here to take you back. Is it that simple? Doctor Strange frowned slightly. And this? Moonlight Knight stretched out his fingers, and a playing card appeared out of nowhere and was caught between his two fingers. What is this? The Punisher asked with some confusion. Moon Knight held the cards and took several deep breaths. Then, he watched the people around him vigilantly, holding the card tightly with both hands, and slowly took a few steps back to put some distance between himself and Doctor Strange and others. After doing all this, he finally spoke. That's something that's going to help us in critical moments and is key to our success. Then, before anyone could react, Moon Knight tore the poker in half. P.S. Thanks for the reward from the book friend's big number brother, please change the name, otherwise it won't be easy to thank you. I would also like to thank other friends for their support, thank you all. It's you. The Punisher whipped out his gun. He had emptied the magazine, but he still had one last bullet, which was originally reserved for himself. You are that guy's spy, and it changes your perception, just like it did to Deadpool. For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Moon Knight. They couldn't believe that Moon Knight's ability and his multiple personalities could be affected by that thing. I overestimated my abilities. We all overestimated our abilities. Moonlight Knight casually threw the broken cards on the ground with an almost crazy smile on his face. I saw Moonlight Knight suddenly taking off his hood. What's horrifying is that under Moon Knight's hood, there's actually Deadpool's mask. Be careful, cognitive pollution has begun. Doctor Strange reminded. Seeing this, everyone except the Punisher took a few steps back, trying to stay away from Moon Knight, who was in a bad state at this time, to ensure their own safety. Give it up, Frank, Moon Knight said. Our sacrifice is critical, it's meaningful, it's looking at us, it's celebrating us, it's embracing us. And you're crazy now, Mark. Or someone else, I don't even know what was stuffed into your broken body. The Punisher stared at Moon Knight without hesitation. The trigger. The bullet penetrated Moon Knight's chest instantly, but surprisingly, not a drop of blood flowed out from Moon Knight's white uniform, and even the wound penetrated by the bullet disappeared in the blink of an eye. It's useless, Frank, it's all over, no one can leave from here, no one. Before Moonlight Knight finished speaking, suddenly, there was a violent shaking. This was not a vibration similar to an earthquake, but it seemed that the entire space was violently rubbing and colliding, and the huge roar was deafening. What did you do? The Punisher glared angrily while holding the wand. If Moon Knight wasn't in such a weird state, the Punisher would have pounced on him and tried to stab him to death. Faced with the Punisher's questioning, Moonlight Knight was also stunned. He glanced at the Punisher blankly, and then kept looking around, as if he was also curious about how all this happened. It wasn't him, it was something else. At this moment, Doctor Strange spoke. He made a gesture with his hands, and the eye of Agamotto slowly opened at his call. At this time, he could see scenes that normal people could not observe at all. In the countless complicated and distorted lights and shadows, everything on the border of reality is falling apart. Countless buildings are shaking unconsciously at high frequencies, as if something is shaking them violently, but this shaking does not cause any damage to those buildings. Just make their outlines blurry. Slowly, a sense of tearing came over. With the help of the eye of Agamotto, Doctor Strange could clearly see that everything in his sight was splitting. Wrong. It's not accurate to say it's a split. Just like the separation of light and shadow, under the spotlight, a photo of the entire New York City slowly separated at this moment. It separated left and right while vibrating at high speed, and gradually turned into two identical photos. I see. At this moment, Doctor Strange finally understood Zhang Yi's purpose. He widened his eyes and looked at this unforgettable spectacular sight in disbelief. What's going on? Carolina frowned. This apocalyptic scene of the sky and the earth collapsing made her very uneasy. Reality is splitting. Someone has released powerful energy in the outside world. This energy has created another reality that overlaps with reality, and Doctor Strange muttered to himself. And what? Carolina asked anxiously. And the two overlapping realities are breaking away from each other. Doctor Strange shouted. Grab the things around you and stand still, something is coming. As if to prove Doctor Strange's words, as soon as he finished speaking, there was an even more violent shaking, and everyone present fell to the ground in the sudden weightlessness. Immediately afterwards, thick fog-like light and shadow flickered in the midair. Under the stunned expressions of everyone, a huge cruise ship suddenly appeared in the air, and then fell downwards under the influence of gravity. The terrifying weight caused it to hit directly. Broke the New York Bridge. Far away, everyone could clearly hear the desperate screams of the frightened people on the distant cruise ship. They had no idea what was happening and why they suffered such an unreasonable disaster. The emergence of cruise ships is just a sign, or in other words, just the beginning. Two glowing light balls came quickly, crossing the road with two long light tails streaking in midair, speeding past in front of everyone. What the hell is that? The Punisher climbed up. He was almost hit by the two light balls just now. Judging from the appearance of that thing, the Punisher highly suspected that it was a ghost car whose real body could not be seen, because the height, appearance, and movement trajectory of the two light balls looked too much like a car, but he didn't know why. No one can see anything except the lights. That's a car light, most likely. Doctor Strange answered the Punisher's question. Reality is falling apart, our dimension is being affected, and now everything from one of those realities is colliding with our dimension. What will be the consequences of that? The Punisher's movements froze in place, and he turned back sharply to look at Doctor Strange. But Doctor Strange didn't answer him at the moment. 4 hands suddenly grew out of Doctor Strange's back, 2 hands covering his ears, 2 hands covering his eyes, and his own too. With one hand, he accidentally hurt his mouth. Don't hear, don't see, don't think. Seeing Doctor Strange's actions, the Punisher turned to look at John on the other side. Among the people present, only Doctor Strange and John had an understanding of magic. The result is that we will die, Carolina said. Some of her former teammates also learned magic. According to her understanding, if two realities collide, either one of them will be completely destroyed, or both worlds will be destroyed at the same time. No, technically speaking, we are still alive. At this time, John spoke. He raised his head and looked at the sky that was about to collapse like a broken mirror. In the cracks of the broken sky, an indescribable, weird and twisted existence that looked like a chrysalis was stretching its tentacles. We live in an alternate reality. The entire dimension is shaking violently, but this is not the most deadly thing. For everyone, the things that are sent here one by one from reality are the most dangerous. This was originally the gap between reality and the mirror dimension, but now, this gap has become a buffer zone when reality is split. At the same time, it is also the place where the impact between dimensions is most severe. The new reality will separate from the original reality and run on its own to become a new parallel universe. However, the original reality will collide with its original mirror dimension and turn into dust in the infinite multiverse. Everything in reality is being copied, and sadly, these ontologies that retain memories are ruthlessly thrown into the pit of fire like firewood, and the copies that are copied, then living in a new reality without any memory. They don't even know they are being copied. The gap in reality has now become a large garbage dump. It will accept all copied existences in reality, whether they are living people or corpses, buildings or natural landscapes. They will continue to bump into this in extremely rough forms. Dimensions. And it will eventually be wiped out into nothingness during the countdown of collision with the mirror dimension. Zhang Yi lied to us. Carolina's eyes widened and she looked at the scene in front of her in disbelief. She saw the Avengers Tower, she saw the SHIELD space carrier falling in the sky, she saw ordinary people abandoned by reality one after another. He is destroying our reality. He is not trying to save us at all. His purpose is to destroy this place. He and that guy are together. They slaughtered superheroes and super criminals. Now, no one can stop him. You fart. Pietro stood up, looked at Carolina angrily, and said. Is there any hope for your world to be saved? Your reality has already fallen into pollution. Rather than turning you into madmen, it would be better to be completely destroyed. If there is any reality that is not worthy of being saved, then Pietro definitely has the right to say it. After all, he himself comes from a desperate universe that is sinking in ruins, and now, this place is about to become a part of the distortion. Pietro didn't want to watch the universe gradually sink, and he didn't allow anyone to tarnish Zhang Yi. So you admit it, right? You are destroying us. Carolina faced Pietro without any fear, and a huge rainbow-colored light erupted from her body. Don't move, little girl. John said coldly. Don't forget who treated your injuries. I can easily leave anything on you without your knowledge. You. Carolina instinctively felt that she had difficulty breathing. I don't know many black magic skills, but there is one thing I know best. It's called Wind of Disaster. It happens that it can destroy people's self-healing cells, even aliens like you are no exception. John stood firmly beside Pietro. Do you think you can survive? Carolina's eyes were full of madness at some point. You were also polluted when you saved me, and it was one of the deepest levels of pollution. Do you think they will take you away? What? Pietro turned to look at John in shock. But when John heard this, he just smiled a ferocious smile. He smiled extremely happily, as if he hadn't been so happy in hundreds of years. Do you think my purpose is to survive? You are right, I have been contaminated. Even Zhang Yi didn't notice this. He even thought I was still under his protection. But do you know why I still stay sane? You can change my perception, but you can't change who I am. You. Carolina opened her mouth as she suddenly thought of something. You're Dracula. Ha 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 ha. John, no, Dracula laughed wantonly. He was floating in the air, looking directly at the cracks tearing reality in the sky. Behind him, the ruins of countless buildings fell from the cracks, and there were ordinary people everywhere. Crying and screaming, the whole scene was like the end of the world. High in the sky, at the level above the dimension, an unprecedented burst of light struck. The light shone straight, penetrating the entire barrier between reality and the mirror world, attracting everyone's attention. Above the sky, countless ferocious cracks crisscrossed each other and were distributed among the clouds in the sky. They were intertwined like spider webs, forming an incomparable network of gaps. It's clear, everything is gradually becoming clear. A new world hidden in the real dimension is gradually rising under the influence of three supreme powers, breaking away from the original real dimension at a speed visible to the naked eye, and moving away from this polluted world at an extremely fast speed. In the eyes of the Punisher, he can clearly see the world reflected in the sky. There, everything is in peace, Spider-Man is wandering in the streets of New York, Captain America Sam is delivering an important speech at the United Nations, X-Men students are out of class, and mutant children are playing in the playground. Everything is so orderly. They have no impression of the other side of reality. No one knows that opposite them, the body of that world is falling apart and gradually heading towards destruction. The tentacles of the chrysalis stretch out from the gap. It seems to want to spread all the way up along the sunlight. It doesn't want to be buried with this abandoned world. It will move desperately, trying to transfer its sight to the newborn baby. And go to the prosperous new world. But. At this moment, dark clouds as dark as ink shrouded everyone's heads. No, that was not a dark cloud at all, but something darker and more elusive. It blocked all light outside dimensions, and also blocked the last connection between that new world and this place. It seemed to come from a world outside the dimension. With an unparalleled terrifying power, it abruptly cut off all eyes and sights that tried to observe the new world. A huge darkness shrouded the sky above the gap in reality, covering the sky. Block out the sun. In other words, it is like a wall between two realities that cannot be crossed by any existence. Below, New York Avenue. Dracula was still laughing and mocking the existence hidden behind Carolina's spiritual world, but the Punisher had long lost the desire to fight. He squinted his eyes hard, trying to see the source of the darkness. Finally, in the colorful sky where light and shadow intersected, he saw mechanical skeletons hidden in the dark curtains one after another. The things looked strangely familiar, just like the ribs of an open umbrella. "It's you!" Moon Knight shouted. He noticed the playing card that he had just torn into pieces with his own hands. The fragments of the playing card were burning with green flames, echoing the surrounding light and shadow. "You do this deliberately. You personally delivered the key to tearing reality into my hands. You already knew that I would be contaminated. You knew I could shred playing cards. You see the future." At this moment, everything came to a standstill. Falling buildings, crying crowds, and natural disasters everywhere seemed to have pressed the pause button at this moment. Then, above the clouds, a huge bird's beak mask shining with metallic light slowly appeared in front of everyone. He descended into this world like a god, paying no attention to the hell-like space on Earth without any emotion. The terrifying pressure came, making everyone breathless. Now this timeline. There was a sound that seemed to resound deep in the soul. "It's under my control. Preview, the next world is about to open."